January 2026. In Vatican City, a new pope, the first American pontiff in history, calls an extraordinary meeting of cardinals to chart the future of the Catholic Church. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in America, parishes are closing at an unprecedented rate. Priests are aging out. Attendance is falling. And by some estimates, within 4 years, certain regions will have just one priest for every 6,000 Catholics. 2,000 years of institutional history. 1 billion followers worldwide. And a question that's becoming impossible to ignore: is the Church ready for what's coming? Not just theologically, not just spiritually, but practically, in terms of leadership, resources, and relevance in a world that's changing faster than at any point in human history. This isn't about belief. It's about survival. The Catholic Church stands at a crossroads unlike any it has faced in modern memory. On one side, there's the promise of renewal, a new papacy, historic reforms, and global efforts at modernization. On the other, there's the weight of crisis, declining numbers, institutional scandals, and a generation that's walking away. Welcome to Soulway, where we examine the forces shaping faith and society. Today, we're taking a deep look at what 2026 means for the Catholic Church, from the corridors of the Vatican to the shrinking congregations of American parishes. This is a story about tradition meeting change, about institutional power confronting human limitations, and about what happens when the world's oldest continuous organization faces its most uncertain future. If you're interested in understanding how one of history's most influential institutions navigates the modern world, stay with me. And if you find this analysis valuable, consider subscribing to Soulway for more in-depth explorations of the stories reshaping our world. Let's start in Rome. In May 2025, something unprecedented happened. Cardinal Robert McElroy of San Diego was elected Pope, taking the name Leo XIV. He became the first American to lead the Catholic Church in its 2,000-year history. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. America, a nation built on separation of church and state, religious, pluralism, and individual freedom, now provides the spiritual leader of an institution that has historically operated quite differently. But Leo XIII inherited more than just a title. He inherited a church in the midst of what some are calling the most ambitious reform process since Vatican II in the 1960s. By January 2026, the new pope will convene what Vatican observers are calling a fundamental turning point, an extraordinary consistory of cardinals to discuss the future direction of the Church. The topics: synodality, Vatican governance, liturgy, the relationship between tradition and adaptation. According to Vatican sources, this isn't just another meeting. It's the symbolic start of a fully Leonine papacy, a chance for the first American pope to put his mark on an institution that has often resisted change. And the changes are already visible. New administrative regulations came into effect January 1st, 2026, modernizing how the Vatican operates. For the first time, lay employees have formal contracts with retirement ages and professional evaluations. Leaders' mandates are limited to 5 years, a stark departure from the lifetime appointments that have historically defined Vatican culture. Even language is changing. Latin, once the official language of all Vatican documents, is now optional. Employees may write in Latin or in another language, acknowledging the multilingual reality of a global church. These might sound like bureaucratic details, but they signal something deeper. An institution recognizing that the ways it operated for centuries may not be sustainable in the 21st century. But here's the question. Can internal Vatican reforms address what's happening on the ground, in parishes and communities, in the daily lived reality of Catholics around the world? Now, let's cross the Atlantic. In 1970, there were 58,000 active priests serving American Catholics. Today, that number has fallen to fewer than 35,000, even as the Catholic population grew by 20 million people. Do the math. In 1981, there was one priest for every 875 Catholics. By 2012, it was one priest for every 2,000 Catholics, a 130% increase in just 3 decades. And it's getting worse. The average age of an American priest today is 63. In 1970, it was 35. By 2030, just 4 years from now, some regions may have only one priest for every 6,000 Catholics. Parishes that have served communities for generations are closing or merging. In some dioceses, announcements of closures come every few weeks. This isn't a distant problem. It's happening right now. In Central California, the church responded by building what some are calling a Catholic megachurch, St. Charles Borromeo in Visalia, with 3,200 seats and sprawling nearly an acre. It merges 4 parishes into one behemoth, serving 8,000 parishioners across 3 Sunday masses. One priest there said, half-jokingly, Jesus would walk through the door and say, "Well, it's not what I had in mind, but way to go, guys." But megachurches are band-aids, not solutions. They work in densely populated areas, but what about rural communities? What about regions where parishes are scattered across vast distances? And then there's the immigration complication. Many American dioceses now rely heavily on priests from Africa, the Philippines, and India, regions where vocations are still strong. But U.S. immigration law has created a bureaucratic nightmare. Green card backlogs mean that foreign-born priests who've been serving American parishes for years suddenly face uncertainty about whether they can stay. One archdiocese reported losing a priest, not because he wanted to leave, but because he couldn't navigate the visa system. His religious order simply reassigned him to Canada, and he's not coming back. The cruel irony? The Catholic Church is dedicated to helping immigrants and refugees, yet it's caught in the grip of immigration policies that threaten its own ability to function. So here's the uncomfortable reality. The American Catholic Church is experiencing a structural collapse in its priesthood, at the exact moment when it's also losing credibility with the people it's meant to serve. Let's talk about why people are leaving. It's not just about fewer priests or inconvenient mass times, it's about trust, or rather, the collapse of it. The clergy sexual abuse scandal didn't just damage the church's reputation, it shattered the fundamental assumption that the institution was morally trustworthy. For decades, church leadership prioritized protecting the institution over protecting victims. That betrayal cut deep. But the problems go beyond abuse. There's financial opacity, multiple lawsuits over tithing practices, and questions about how donated funds are used. The Vatican's wealth is massive, yet there's little transparency about where the money goes or how it's managed. There's also the generational divide. Younger Catholics, particularly in America, are increasingly at odds with church teachings on issues like gender roles, LGBTQ+ rights, and women's ordination. They see these not as theological necessities, but as institutional choices that contradict modern understandings of human dignity and equality. And here's a striking statistic. Among non-Catholics in America, 25% associate the Catholic priesthood with predatory behavior, and 28% consider priests untrustworthy. These aren't fringe opinions. These are mainstream perceptions that make it nearly impossible to attract young men to the priesthood. One newly ordained priest recounted being called a pedophile simply for wanting to enter seminary. The stigma is real and it's toxic. The church's response has been mixed. Some dioceses have implemented robust safeguarding protocols and transparency measures. Others have been slow to act, legalistic in their approach, and defensive when criticized. But the damage is done. Trust, once lost, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild, especially when the institution itself resists the kind of fundamental accountability that would be required. What do you think it would take for the church to rebuild trust? Is it even possible at this point? Share your thoughts in the comments. There's another factor at play that's often overlooked: the internet. 30 years ago, if you had questions about church history, doctrine, or the behavior of church leaders, your options were limited. You could ask a priest, consult a Catholic encyclopedia, or attend classes. The church controlled the narrative. Today, anyone with a smartphone can access centuries of church history, scholarly critiques, alternative theological perspectives, and detailed accounts of institutional failures, all within minutes. The information asymmetry that once empowered religious authority has collapsed. And it's not just about access to information. It's about critical thinking. People today are exposed to diverse viewpoints from childhood. They're taught to question authority, to seek evidence, and to make up their own minds. When someone encounters a teaching that doesn't align with their lived experience or their moral intuition, they don't just accept it on authority anymore. They research it. They discuss it online. They compare it to other perspectives. And if it doesn't hold up, they walk away. This is what researchers mean when they say people are smarter by orders of magnitude than they were 30 years ago. Not biologically smarter, but more informed, more critical, and less willing to accept claims without evidence. For institutions like the Catholic Church, which have historically relied on authority and tradition as primary sources of legitimacy, this is a profound challenge. You can't control the narrative anymore. You can't simply say, trust us because we're the church. People will fact-check you. They'll find the uncomfortable parts of church history you'd rather not discuss. They'll point out the contradictions. And once that mystique of authority is punctured, it's very hard to restore. Now, here's where the story gets more complex. While the church is declining in the West, North America, Europe, parts of Latin America, it's exploding in other parts of the world. Africa is seeing dramatic growth. The Catholic population in sub-Saharan Africa has increased by 238% since 1980, approaching 200 million believers. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Nigeria are now among the top countries for Catholic population. Asia, particularly the Philippines and India, remain strong. And in parts of Latin America, despite challenges, the church still commands significant cultural influence. This creates a fascinating dynamic. The future of Catholicism is increasingly non-Western, non-white, and globally dispersed. The cultural center of gravity is shifting away from Europe and America. But here's the tension. Church leadership remains overwhelmingly white, Western, and elderly. The average age of cardinals is well into the 70s. Many were formed in mid-20th century American or European contexts. Will the Church's leadership reflect its changing demographics? Will teachings and practices that made sense in 20th century Rome adapt to 21st century contexts in Lagos, Manila, or Sao Paulo? These aren't just cultural questions. They're questions about power, representation, and whose voices shape the future of the institution. And they are questions the Church will be forced to answer in 2026 and beyond, whether it wants to or not. So what's actually on the agenda for 2026? Beyond the extraordinary consistory in January, several major initiatives are unfolding. First, there's the aftermath of the 2025 Jubilee year, a year-long celebration of hope that brought millions of pilgrims to Rome. The question now is whether that spiritual energy translates into sustained renewal or fades as pilgrims return home. Second, the U.S. bishops are planning to consecrate the United States to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a significant spiritual event tied to the 250th anniversary of American independence. For American Catholics, this is a moment to reflect on the relationship between faith and national identity. Third, the World Day of Peace in 2026 carries the theme towards an unarmed and disarming peace, a bold statement in a world marked by rising geopolitical tensions and conflicts. Fourth, and perhaps most practically, dioceses worldwide are implementing reforms from the global synodal process, a multi-year consultation that gathered input from Catholics around the world about the Church's future direction. Implementation timelines run through 2026, with evaluations happening throughout the year. And finally, there's the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping parishes open, finding priests, serving communities, and navigating the financial and logistical challenges of running a global institution with shrinking resources in key regions. None of this will be easy, and none of it guarantees success. The Church is attempting something extraordinarily difficult, maintaining continuity with 2 millennia of tradition while adapting to a world that's changing faster than any previous generation has experienced. So, is the Church ready for 2026? The honest answer is partially. There are signs of genuine reform, new leadership, administrative modernization, global consultation processes, and a willingness to at least acknowledge that the status quo isn't sustainable. But there are also deep structural problems that reforms alone won't solve. The priest shortage, the trust deficit, the generational divide, the tension between tradition and adaptation. The Catholic Church in 2026 will be an institution in transition, caught between what it was and what it might become. For some, that's a crisis. For others, it's an opportunity. Here's my question for you. What would successful adaptation look like for an institution like the Catholic Church? What should it change and what should it preserve? And is it even possible to balance continuity and reform in a way that satisfies both traditionalists and those demanding change? I'd genuinely love to hear your perspective, whether you're Catholic, another faith tradition, or simply someone interested in how ancient institutions navigate modernity. If this video gave you a new way of thinking about one of the world's most influential organizations, share it.